the planning committee, which is on soon today. We will run through the agenda. One is apologies for absence. Jackie?
I've received I've received no apologies, but Councillor Ryan isn't here yet, so I don't know whether there's a problem or whether
thank you very much for that. Is there any declaration of interest by anyone? No, thank you very much for that. Thumbs up, anyone? Anyone agree they're a quick record? Are we all still there? Yeah, thumbs up from both hands. Is everyone else frozen? Am I frozen, Jackie? Are we all still there?
Yep.
Okay, we go on to the report on item 4, revision to scheme of delegations. And who's taking this? Is it David or Mark?
So okay, so for sort of context, largely for the members of the public, I'm sure all the members will recall that on the 23rd of April, we agreed a temporary scheme of delegation, which in effect allowed for all decisions to be determined under delegated powers, subject to the chair or vice chair's agreement. So anything that would have historically gone to planning committee could potentially have been delegated, subject to the chair and vice chair's agreement. We agreed at our meeting that we would review the situation in 3 months' time. So obviously this meeting is taking place just under 3 months from that previous meeting on the 23rd of April. Now, it probably just worth mentioning that for members' interest, at Appendix D of your report, there's a list of applications that have been determined under delegated powers that would have come to committee under the old scheme of delegation prior to the 23rd of April, but were determined under delegated powers with the agreement of the chair in all but one cases. There was one case where Keith declared an interest and the vice chair agreed the use of delegated powers in that case. So Appendix D, there's 10 cases there that were determined over that period under that previous scheme. But obviously we would like to get a little bit more back to normal. Coronavirus, the sort of worst impact is hopefully out of the way, fingers crossed. And we are proposing that we try and get back to normal and start having planning committees again. In order to facilitate that, there's a couple of changes that we're proposing to make today. One is to the scheme of delegation, and the other is to the public speaking arrangements for planning committee. Now, I'll go through the scheme of delegation changes first. Now, to a certain extent, whilst coronavirus has sort of pushed us to make some changes on delegated powers, I think there were calls from various members to make some changes to these in any case. So the changes we're proposing today are in terms of the scheme of delegation, that is, are proposed as more permanent changes. So do bear that in mind. It's not necessary. These ones are ones that we're proposing that we try and roll out on a more permanent basis, not necessarily just for a short-term period due to coronavirus. On the other hand, however, the public speaking arrangements are a temporary arrangement to make virtual committees more straightforward during this time. So if I run through the proposals to the scheme of delegation to begin with, so it's probably best if members are looking at paragraphs 7 onwards, and also Appendix C, which outlines in the detailed wording of the proposed new scheme of delegation. So in summary, the proposals are that all other applications. Now, we class applications in 3 different categories in planning. Other is a bit of a loose word, but it's one used by national government to categorise certain types of planning applications. So we have major applications, which are 10 or more dwellings or 1,000 square meters or more of commercial floor space. You have minors, which is anything from 1 to 9 developments up to 10 houses, so 1 to 9, or commercial development of up to 1,000 square meters. And then we have other applications, which are things like household extensions, listed building applications, and changes of use. So they're the sort of three categories, and you'll see at Appendix C there's a footnote which clearly outlines what falls in each of those three categories. So in terms of other applications, we are proposing that all other applications can be determined under delegated powers, with a couple of exceptions that I come on to. For minor applications, it would be there would be a trigger of 4 or more objections, as proposed here, and for major applications, there would be a trigger of 2 or more objections, as proposed here. So, the couple of exceptions in this case are that where there is a significant departure from the development plan, that's the local plan, that we would also bring cases to planning committee. And just on that, I just want to make a quick change, if I can, verbally to Appendix C. If members look at Appendix C, you'll see that for majors, section A1B, the proposal would represent a serious departure from the development plan. And you'll see that in minors, the wording is the proposal would represent a significant departure to the approved development plan. I think we just picked up that there's actually slightly different wording between the two, and there's not necessarily any logic behind that. So apologies for that. But we propose to rename the major bullet point, so 1B bullet point, to read the same as the 2B bullet point. So we're replacing serious in effect with significant, just to get the wording consistent. Because I think that's just a sort of slight inconsistency there in the wording. The other exception is that at bullet 3 of the new scheme of delegation, members will see that there's the ability for members to call in applications. Now, previously, that was limited to within 14 days of the publication of the weekly list. Weekly lists do get produced now, but they don't get published as such. They're produced automatically on an online system. So that sort of 14-day period was a bit really relates to something we historically did but don't really do anymore. And 14 days was quite restrictive, we felt, bearing in mind the change to the scheme of delegation. So this proposes that members can call in applications within 6 weeks of a major application and 4 weeks in the cases of a minor or other application. That's from the valid date. So 6 weeks from the valid date for major, 4 weeks from the valid date for minor or other applications. So in a nutshell, that's the main changes. There's a couple of other minor points I'd point out. In paragraph bullet point 4 of Appendix C, we've clarified that staff applications exclude applications where the Norwich City Council is the applicant. i.e., if you're a member of staff but you're making an application on behalf of Norwich City Council as their employee. We just wanted to clarify that wasn't captured, because we did have a query on that. So this is personal applications for members of staff rather than ones they're making on behalf of the City Council. City Council's applications would be captured in the same way in terms of majors or minors. However, to ensure there's scrutiny over Norwich City Council's applications which are contentious and are other applications, you'll see that bullet point 5, we've added a requirement that Norwich City Council's own applications which have 4 or more objections and are other applications, i.e. households, listed buildings or changes of use, would also need to come to planning committee. So we've added that in just to add a level of additional scrutiny over City Council's own applications where they are contentious. So I believe that covers everything on the scheme of delegation. I'll move on just to explain the public speaking arrangements. So
Can I just stop you there, Mark?
Yep.
Is everyone happy with the explanation? Do anyone need any more clarification? What Mark has said. Well, okay, everyone all right? Jane, you have a yes? Do you want to say something? Jane, do you want to unmute?
Hi. A question. At the top of page 11, the heading is proposal, and it says, going forward, it is proposed that the Planning Applications Committee will continue to meet virtually using an appropriate platform. Are you saying indefinitely, or just for up until November initially to review? So are we becoming a virtual committee permanently? Is that the idea? Or is it just for the next, because that wording isn't precise in my view, but it could be that I'm just being overly pedantic, and if I am, I do apologise. Mark, I'll mute now, thank you.
So I was going to come on to explain our thoughts on this in a little bit more detail under the public speaking bit, because it's more relevant to how that's more relevant to sort of the operation rather than the scheme of delegation as such. But I think we're minded to keep under review. I think we could easily, I think at the moment we suggested 3 months in there, but actually having seen some, I think it was either yesterday or day before, some new guidance came out on holding public meetings. So I think we probably need to keep this under review. My preference, to be honest, was that we actually hold physical meetings as of August, but the monitoring officer gave us some advice that would not be appropriate. But obviously this is a rapidly changing situation, so it could well be that by the time we get a little bit further down the line, that it is appropriate to hold a physical meeting. I think my personal preference is to return to a physical meeting, well, as soon as we safely can do so. But there are a number of considerations to take into account in that respect, in terms of if anyone was shielding, for example, and the ability to have the technology to allow that to happen. So I think it's something we'd like to keep under review. The decision today isn't necessarily making any decision on whether it's virtual or physical. So I think that's something which doesn't necessarily need a decision from this committee. I think we will obviously are happy to speak to any members about that, but whether it's physical or virtual, I think will depend on our ability to get the technology operational and whatever the guidance is at the particular point in time. So I'm certainly not saying that we will indefinitely hold virtual meetings. We will look to get a physical meeting back in place as soon as we can do so safely and the technology allows.
Paul, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just directly on that point, and it is not just for the planning committee, but a question for the council in general. Are we exploring at this point whether there'd be a possibility to have a combination, permanent or long-term permanently, because it has proved useful for those who can't make it on a day, so that you could have a combination of both physical and remote?
That's something we'll have to take to the executive committee to see if they're looking into that, the way they're going to work.
Yeah, that's what I meant, not for us to discuss it, but that needs to be discussed. Yeah.
I'll pass that on for you now.
Thank you.
Mark, did you want to go into the Mike Sands and then Judith? Mike first.
Yep. On paragraph 7 at the top of page 11, is it worth, after the words going forward, just inserting the clause for the foreseeable future? That way it covers the concerns that I've lost her. Who's not here? That,
Jane.
Yeah, that Jane had. Yeah.
If you want to come back on that, so today you're not making any decision on whether it's virtual or physical. The recommendation is in 2 parts, purely relating to the scheme of delegation at Appendix C, and the matter of whether there's public speaking. And the matter of whether there's public speaking, which I'll come on to explain our proposal in a minute, I think we would propose that this happens to a certain extent for the next few meetings, irrespective of whether it's physical or virtual, because perhaps if we've got any questions on the scheme of delegation, if we do that, as I think Keith was suggesting, and then I'll come on to explain the public speaking proposals in a minute, which is a bit more relevant to this virtual or physical question.
What, coming on the first? Stuart, I think I'm proposing on everyone's.
Councillor Ludwig is indicating.
Yes.
I would be in favour of setting a date for a review of this online situation, because number 7, it does look as though we're going forward online, whereas we're hearing from the officer that it is a temporary arrangement. So could we set a date for a review of the online situation? And that this is mainly because I am concerned about the opportunity for the public to have participation. And I know that if we meet in a physical meeting, it's more likely that we can have representation from the public. So I don't mind the next couple of months will be fine, but I think we ought to set a review date of perhaps December of, again, looking at whether or not we're going to continue online or meet in a physical way.
Okay, I took that into consideration. I think what we're trying to do is meet all together in public, but when it comes to, we won't be able to have members of the public being there, if I understand. But that's the next bit Mark's going to talk about. If anyone's got anything to talk about the first piece, Councillor Stooley, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in reference to paragraph 3 on page 18, the appropriate planning justification for calling in a scheme. How is that to be validated, please? Is it to be determined by the councillor or officers? Thank you.
I think all there needs to be is a material planning consideration. So if it was something that wasn't a material planning consideration, that would be the only reason that we would say, you know, that's not really something we can consider. But as long as it's a material planning consideration, it will be an appropriate planning justification. So if members saying that, for example, the neighbours' amenity needs to be considered by the committee, that will be enough to trigger it. I think it's just if there's an issue that goes, you know, if it's a matter of neighbours got concerns over, you know, a party wall issue or something like that, then that's not a material planning consideration, and we would sort of say, well, hang on, that's not really something we can consider anyway, so it's therefore not appropriate for the planning committee to consider that particular issue. But we might ask, well, is that the only issue, or there are other material planning considerations which justify that, really? You know, 99% of the time it's going to be, you know, there's going to be a planning justification, I would imagine, that is the reason why a member's asking it to call in.
Thank you, Mark. Can I just come back on that and give an example of my own? If for example, there is a light issue and planning officers have considered that light issue and put it in the report, but plan to pass that as not material, can that still be called in as a consideration, please?
Yes, if it's yeah, I assume my light issue, if you mean like loss of light and things, yes, yeah. So any sort of thing certainly anything that relates to the effect of a development on a neighbour's amenity, be it light, overshadowing, privacy, that they would all be justified reasons for a member calling in.
Thanks very much.
We'll do the second now, which is the speaking up.
So I didn't quite catch that, Keith.
Oh, it's David, is it? Or is it Mark?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to come back on the point. It's David here. I just wanted to come back on Councillor Stuteley's point, and just to expand on what Mark said. In terms of the planning justification, I think the point that Councillor Stuteley was getting at is, does the officer agree that that is a reason for, I don't know, refusing it, or doing something differently with the application? it's not that. It's just that the councillor has to raise it as an issue, and it has to be a material planning consideration. We won't vet whether or not it should be refused or altered or whatever. Provided it's a material planning consideration that the councillor raises, then it would be referred to committee.
Councillor Lovett, did you want to come in? Judith?
Yes, it was on the scheme of delegation. I am somewhat surprised by these changes. They are quite significant changes, and I think Mark alluded to the fact that they would have been made at some time because there had been pressure to make these changes. Well, I feel that I'm most effective in planning on these other applications where you are actually sort of helping the householder who is objecting to get the issue heard by a committee. And I'm really disappointed to see these changes. And I do think that it is a step backwards to allow the public to participate in the issue of planning applications. And I just would like to know why it is seen that we do it at this particular time when perhaps not many people are aware of this change, and what sort of pressures the planning officers are under to bring about these drastic changes.
I think they're under any pressure. Mark, did you want to come in, or David?
So the changes aren't, like as I said at the start, they're not really related to the impact of coronavirus necessarily, albeit the fact that we changed the scheme of delegation previously. Here we're doing some changes which a few members have indicated to us in the past they would like to see. The aim here is to focus the committee's attention on those most significant developments and focus the resource of planning committee on the biggest schemes, make sure that those biggest, most contentious schemes are getting that level of that highest level of scrutiny and the most amount of time consideration. But Keith, I'm conscious we're getting into debate here, and I haven't gone through the public speaking section. And I know there's been a few questions so far on this sort of public speaking sort of virtual. I just wonder if it's helpful for me to go through the rest of it. Okay. So I'll just go over the public speaking proposals. Now, these are temporary, and these are a result of trying to make the interim arrangements while we've got the coronavirus situation a bit smoother to deal with and to operate. There's a few challenges, obviously, with holding planning committee meetings in terms of social distancing. If we hold a physical meeting, we could socially distance as a committee and officers in the council chamber, for example. However, then having the numbers of members of the public, as members will be aware, can vary quite significantly from committee to committee. Some committees there's only a handful, whereby members of the public could potentially also social distance, but in some committees we have a significant number of members of the public turn up, and actually that's quite unpredictable sometimes on the day of the meeting as to knowing exactly how many people are going to arrive. If you get 70 people who arrive, then you're never going to be able to hold the meeting physically, and so there's some challenges there. Equally, holding a online meeting, there's some challenges in terms of holding public speaking, ensuring that you don't get meetings gate crashed. But so we're trying to come up with a balance that works and operates. We're recommending this on a temporary basis so we can review it. The first meeting following any decision today would be the August meeting. So we're looking at potentially at least rolling these out for the August meeting. Members could see how that meeting runs. I think it would be helpful to run a virtual meeting along these lines and see how it goes. And we might then have a better idea of the extent to which we might be able to incorporate virtual public speaking. So with all that in mind, what we are proposing, and so just it's important to note that planning committee meetings they're not they're not public meetings, they're meetings held in public. So there's no legal right or ability for members of the public to actively be involved in the meeting in terms of being able to speak or participate in the meeting, but there is a legal right for members of the public to be able to observe the meeting taking place. Now, having said that, clearly it is very beneficial for objectors and people in support of cases to put their reasons to the committee, and that's clearly something that is desirable. It's not, there's no legal obligation there, but it's clearly something that is desirable, so the members can have a better understanding of some of the concerns that that sort of members of the public may have, in an equally in some cases support for schemes. So what we are proposing is that following the, it's proposed that public screenings are suspended for up to a period of 3 months, but I'd be minded to say that we'd keep that under review. I think we'd probably review it after the August meeting, and because it may then be possible to change back to physical meetings shortly after that point. And what we're proposing to do is, instead of having public speaking, we'll have the ability for members of the public to submit statements which will be read out. We've put under at the end of paragraph 17, we've put some requirements there which sort of set out some procedures around this, because obviously we're trying to get a balance between how much time we spend on this, making sure that things are succinct. So we're proposing that the number of statements that can be read out would be up to 6 for a major application and 4 for a minor application. And those statements will be read out by an officer. Where such statements exceed 500 words, we'd look to summarise the contents. If more than the above number of statements are submitted, officers will try and summarise all the statements. They could be in objection or support, and the applicant or agent would also be able to prepare a statement which would be read out. So that's our proposal to try and ensure a smooth operation of the August meeting, but to also allow a level of additional contribution from members of the public. I think we'd look to try and move back to a public speaking arrangement as soon as we possibly can. So I'll try and wrap up this soon, but something I just wanted to add to what I said in the report is that just following the report, we've sort of considered some of the public sector equality duty considerations around this. So just as an update, I think we're of the view that the changes to the scheme of delegation are not the changes to the scheme of delegation are not considered to have any equality implications, but there's a few matters just to raise in relation to the public speaking arrangements. Just to ensure there's no discrimination against users of the service with protected characteristics. Now, I think one aspect of this is that virtual meetings could have an impact on those members of the population who don't have IT equipment to be able to participate in a virtual meeting. So that's one side of things members to consider. There's also an aspect of this whole statement side of things that there's a concern that there could be some discrimination against people with the inability to put comments in writing, be that through disability or a language barrier, for example. Now, to a certain extent, this does already exist in the planning service, in that we do require written representations as part of a planning application, and we do in order to then be able to speak at a planning committee historically. I wanted just to stress that we would, and I wanted to recommend to committee and stress that clearly, I think it's unlikely, but were such a situation to arise, that we would clearly put appropriate arrangements and assistance in place to assist anyone who had a protected characteristics, which means that participating in the way outlined here is not possible. And indeed, that is already the case. Clearly, if we come into contact with any member of the public who is struggling to put representations in writing to us, we would always ensure that we assist those members of the public and put adjustments in place. And indeed, the chair has discretion to allow people to speak outside of these arrangements in exceptional circumstances. So I just wanted to sort of raise that because it had been raised by the monitoring officer, and I just wanted to sort of outline how we considered that public sector equality duty in considering these proposals. So with that said, I will stop talking and hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Mark, for that report. Does anyone want to come in and speak on any of the 2 points? Do you want to move straight to the recommendations? Okay, we'll move straight to the recommendations.
Sorry, Chair, there are members indicating.
I ain't seen no
Yeah,
one.
there are members indicating to speak. Councillor Sands, Bogline and Lubbock have raised hands.
Okay, I see Councillor Lubbock, you go first. Judith?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark, for explaining that. I've got no issue with the public speaking, and I'm glad that we've made the concession a bit of allowing written representations, and I think that's very helpful. And also your desire to get back to public participation as soon as possible, whether it be online or in a physical contribution. I suppose a lot depends on the platform that we might use. I mean, there are other local authorities that aren't using Zoom, they're using MS. I think it's MS. South Staffordshire are using MS Teams, and in that way they actually allow people to speak virtually, and that seems to be working well for them. But I mean, we don't actually stipulate that we're going to meet by Zoom in future, but presumably we are, but we haven't actually said that, have we? So for someone who was disappointed that we didn't meet by Zoom 3 months ago, when we met by Zoom to decide that we weren't meeting for play, I am still disappointed that we are going to continue meeting virtually. I mean, you see the MPs in the Houses of Parliament and in the Commons sitting apart. I mean, it's an ideal situation for us to actually meet in the council chamber, and I hope that will be considered as soon as possible. And then that gives the public greater access to see what's going on and to participate.
I think that's what's been recommended, Judah, for the next meeting, which is August, that we meet in the council chamber. Is that correct, Mark?
No,
well, I don't think so.
That was, to be honest, that was my preference, but certainly when I was putting this report together, that it was the case that we could not. We advised that we could not do that. Yeah. However, literally, I think 2 days ago there was some new government guidance coming out, so we will keep that under review. We're not asking members today to make a decision on whether any meeting is virtual or physical. I think that's something that we need to, I think that's an operational matter that we will we'll sort of take note of what members say about this today, but it's an operational matter rather than a matter for this committee to determine.
But it is in respect to the public participation that it's important that we discuss that, though, and I'm quite happy to meet by Zoom if that is what is really necessary for the minimum amount of time, and with this opportunity for the public to submit their written statements. That's absolutely fine. But what I'm not happy about is the change in the delegated powers, because I think that we really haven't, this isn't the time to start changing such rules as we've had up to now. And I think that is the area where the public will be most disadvantaged, the fact that they will not be able to come along and speak on the applications, whether it's in support or objecting to them, without a councillor having called it in. So it really is up to councillors to be more aware of the applications and to make some inquiries as to whether they're contentious or not. I mean, from the outset, people are disadvantaged because they don't have IT, because you know, in a flick of a switch, you can find out, you know, the latest planning applications. But people who don't have that facility are very much dependent on word of mouth and you know, perhaps a councillor phoning them up or talking to them about it. And I just think that this the change to the scheme of delegation very much disadvantages the householder, not being able to put their views about how an application affects them to the committee for their decision. So I can't support the scheme of delegation changes that are here.
Councillor Neil?
Hi there. On both points, I get the feeling that you want to move from 2 objections to 4 as a convenience to cut down on the number of applications that need to be discussed with the committee. But if you look at it logically, I think the vast majority of properties, if people are going to object in a domestic environment, it's normally something that's affecting the neighbours. So it's logically that there'll be probably 1-2 neighbours that adjoin that property, and to get 4 neighbours who would be affected would be quite difficult. So those neighbours on either side who are, you know, very directly affected will not have the voice. And then secondly, on the public, you want to temporarily stop the facility for public speaking. I don't know whether you're just citing it because the difficulties with using online meetings, but even with Zoom, you have the facility to put guest speakers into a waiting room so that they can't interrupt and be part of the debate, but they can be given their 3 minutes. I say this on a personal basis because I wanted to speak on an application about my neighbour, and I didn't even have the facility to actually have it read, and it was, so I didn't get my 3 minutes, and it was passed by delegated responsibilities. So I personally feel aggrieved that I haven't had my chance for representation. So I'd like you to reconsider that part of, and I can't technically see why you can't do it.
Thank you, Councillor Neil. Councillor Bergline?
You might have to bear with me. I've got three points I'd like to make. The first one is that just to say that, you know, in retrospect, it's been really disappointing that we had these delegated powers. I know of at least one planning application that has been approved under delegated powers that has caused quite a lot of grief amongst residents, not even of my ward, but they got in contact with me as part of the planning committee. So you know, just to say that I think there have been, we've just heard from Councillor Neil, there have been issues with it, and there have been planning applications that should have been determined by committee, in my opinion. To move to public speaking and the arrangements we're going to make, I agree with Councillor Neil. I would really like to see a combination for people who cannot join virtually. They can send in their speeches and they can be read out. I think that is actually more inclusive. To the other one, and people who can join, I don't see why they can't speak on Zoom. There is really no reason why not. They can be in a waiting room, they can be let in by the host and then basically kicked out by the host once they've finished speaking. So I don't see there is any reason why this shouldn't be happening, why we have to do things on Zoom. Finally, with regards to the new scheme of delegation, I'm slightly split-minded about it. I can see the point that that it's really important that the planning committee focuses on. You know, sometimes we see we've got like a number of small applications and they get kind of discussed in the same time as we discuss 240 new dwellings. So I can see some merit in that. However, I'm really concerned about it if that is not communicated really clearly. I think if we adopt this scheme, it needs to be made clear to anyone who objects that there are new rules and that they have to contact their councillor for advice. It has to be made clear in an automatic letter that, you know, they no longer have the right to speak for any other applications at the planning committee, and they should get the direct contact of their councillor, so there can be a dialogue between their councillor and the residents, so they're not disadvantaged. And we as councillors must be really confident that, you know, we don't get looked at by members of the planning committee, you know, in a negative way by bringing in other applications. So this is not an annoyance. It's people's lives, it's people's neighbours, it's their houses. It's, you know, it's what matters to them. So we must be confident that we call in as many of these applications as we need to.
Councillor Sands, Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Just one thing, a point Councillor Neal made of reducing the required number of objections from 4 to 2, I think is actually quite a sensible idea. But the point I want to make is in terms of having people speak. In county, in scrutiny, cabinet, and also in planning, if people can't be in a Zoom or Teams waiting room, the officers have a system whereby they have speakers on standby. They say, we're going to phone you about such and such a time. And so those speakers who don't have access to technology to link in video-wise can then speak on the phone for their allocated period of time, submit their questions, their queries, whatever, and their phone is patched in through Teams or Zoom or whatever is being used. And that seems to work quite well.
Mark, did you want to come back on any of the questions asked?
Probably not.
Okay, fine. Is there any other councillor wish to comment on the 2 recommendations?
Chair, Councillor Samaisi.
Councillor Samaisi. I'm going to take them separately anyway. I think that would be better if we took them separately anyway.
Chair, Councillor Samaisi is indicating, please.
I'll just ask her to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm really interested in all this discussion. I tend to agree with Councillor Neal as well. I think the 2 complaints would be a good idea because, as indicated, often it is just those who live directly either next door or opposite are affected. And I also think Councillor Borderline makes some good points about we must feel confident as councillors that we can, you know, feel free and confident that we can respond in that way. So I think that those 2 things are really important. I mean, for me, I think technology doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to be excluded. We could find that it encourages more involvement and more participation from people. And I just would like us to be thinking about how we're going to measure that, try to use it in that way to promote participation. Because I think we could find that by saying to people, you can actually come and speak at a committee or have your representations in that way, could actually empower people and we could hear more voices from our residents in Norwich. That's all I wanted to say, Chair. Thank you. I'm muting now.
Okay, I think I'm going to say something now. I mean, as being chair of the committee for the last couple of years, some of the applications what come into us as planners, they get left towards the end of the committee, and they're saying there's not a lot of speaking going on with the last 3 or 4 which go through in a day. Some of our members already left at dinner time because we spoke too long on the other ones. I mean, it's gone that. So what we were trying to do, it's like a tree. So how many have we actually turned down? We don't usually turn that many down at full committee. And what we're saying is where people were asking to go in or do this, I mean, the same decision would have been made if there was 2 elections or 4. The difference is that the officers would have made it and it didn't come to committee. So we sit there for 7 or 8 hours in a committee where we didn't need to. Now, I know some people get up after 3 or 4 hours and go, but some members have to stay. And they do stay. I mean, I know some people are working and some people can't do this, but it always gets put on a certain amount of people to stay there, but we've got a quarter to get through the rest of the business. So I believe things like tree preservation orders, I mean, what have they got to come towards us? Two people objected to it. I mean, we're all going to say, yes, it's a great idea. I can't see no one saying no to anything like this. And they're the kind of applications that we don't need to have at committee, I believe. And Sandra was at our last meeting we had in the council, in the main clerk room. She was saying, why did we have these last ones here as well? Jane, you spoke, Councillor Bergline, you spoke before. Anyone else want to speak? Councillor Button?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? I would agree totally with what you said.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the applications we have come to us, we spend hours and hours on, and really there's not really that much material to take a decision what could have been taken by delegation. I mean, we've spent sometimes hour and a half on a minor application, what could have been done through delegation. And like people have said, we can then use a lot more time on major things and make sure that's debated properly. So I agree with it. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak? I've got 3 people who have spoken before, 4 now. Councillor Stutley? Ian? You got to unmute.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to support both elements of this proposal with reservations, because I think we should explore further the opportunities for the public to participate further and to speak. But I think the councillor call-in element of it is extremely important, and that's why I asked a question on it earlier. It gives us the it gives the public the protection, and also as councillors we're elected to look after the interests of our residents by keeping an eye on the applications that come to us and spotting anything that might need to come to committee. So I think there's an element there of protection for the public, and I'm happy to support both. But as I said, I'd like to explore further participation. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Bergline, Councillor May, Councillor Sand, Councillor Lovick. I've got Councillor Hutley first. I'm going to take you because he hasn't spoke. Councillor Hutley.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Taking into account some of the things that have been said of using various forms or forums, I do think that this idea of reviewing after the August meeting seems a sensible proposal when we're looking at the public speaking here. We can see how it goes in that one, and then we've got an opportunity to immediately respond.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bergline.
I just first of all, thank you. So first of all, I'd like to make it clear that when I sit on the planning committee, I don't get annoyed by minor applications coming through, and I think it's not truthful to say that we're annoyed and leave by midday for lunch and stuff. Like, I think that is not true for the vast majority of planning members, and I don't want to be represented like this. I've just got to make that really clear. I think we take this very seriously, and we know that it's about people living in their homes, and any change to it affects them. So that to start with. Secondly, I would like to see 2 changes to the public speaking suggestions. One is that if members of the public would like to join on Zoom, that they get the opportunity. That might not be agreed today, but I'd like to really see that happening. And the second is a commitment that any ward councillors can have the right to speak in spite on a Zoom meeting. So even if we might not be able to get it up and running, that members of the public can speak at the Zoom meeting. I'd at least like to have the commitment that ward councillors can join planning committee meetings to speak on behalf of residents in a in a virtual presence. So we've got at least that option of someone virtually representing their residents. And then I take Councillor Neil's points into account, and I was wondering whether other members would be minded to change the minor applications objections back to 2, because it is true that it's the neighbours that will be affected, and as a matter of physical fact, those are likely to be 2. So I wonder whether members would be minded to amend this back to 2 or more objections.
Okay, well, that will come up at the end. Councillor Samaisi?
Thank you, Chair. Kind of echoing really what Councillor Ballblind has said. You know, I think it's right to say that I do agree, we've often sat in those meetings for a very long time, Keith, but we've all taken it very seriously, and it is important, it is people's lives, and that's what we're there for. So,
David, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on what a couple of councillors have said about neighbours, and the number of objections that would trigger a referral for minor applications, which is the proposal at 8B on page 11. The current proposal is that other applications, which are householder extensions, which I think in particular Councillor Neil referred to, wouldn't come to committee unless they, regardless of the number of objections that they attracted, unless they were actually called in by a councillor. I just wanted to make sure that the committee was clear on that point. So in my view is there's less of an argument for decreasing the number of representations at 8B, because that's not the kind of, it's not a householder application. It's not an extension to a house that will be called in under that proposal. It's a new house on a plot next door, or so there's likely to be more people affected than just the immediate neighbours. I just wanted to make clear to councillors that was actually the situation that we were talking about.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Lubbock and then Councillor Sands.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, that underlines the point that we will not get many domestic applications in the future. And I think that's the way that we get more participation from the public, because people want to come along and have their say, and to see the committee making the decisions that most affect them. And I think to take that opportunity away is not right to do it at this time and in this fashion. People are not understanding of all the changes taking place. And I think these are sweeping changes, and it will look very much as though we're taking these sweeping changes at a time when people aren't really aware and able to make representation about them. I don't suppose many people have looked at our Planning Applications Committee meeting, and the press probably haven't picked up on it. So I think it's the wrong time to take those decisions, and I would be unhappy taking them at any time, because that's when you get the greatest number of members of the public coming along and participating. So I'm very, very unhappy with taking those decisions. If we feel we're spending far too long on these household decisions, then we should be more focused on what we're doing. The meeting should be better chaired, and we wouldn't be spending an hour and a half on one application, a household application. We always have the bigger applications at the beginning of the meeting, the major ones and the minor ones. So that we spend more time on those because they come at the earlier on in the meeting. So we've got that right. But I think in if you let these powers go to the officers now, there'll be no looking at them again. I can guarantee that that'll be gone. And so I'm very emphatically against these delegated powers as they stand at the moment. On the issue of public speaking, I'm happy to look at the situation again after the August meeting, and as others have said, to explore how we can, if we continue to be virtual meeting, then explore how we can take representation from people who join the meeting virtually, or as Councillor Sands said, via a phone call. I think there are opportunities there. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. There is a distinction between minor and major applications. However, I don't think minor applications means it's lacking in either significance or importance. There have been occasions in the past where we've had a minor application which has sparked quite significant discussion and debate. So, you know, I'm sort of concerned that perhaps we are heading down the road where we say, right, this is a major application, is worthy of lengthy and in-depth debate. This is a minor application, and this isn't worth lengthy and in-depth debate. And I don't think that's a distinction that we should be making, because you never know when something comes forward that turns out to have much greater significance than we thought before the planning session actually began.
Okay, thank you. I've got no other person indicating. I'm going to move the recommendations. I think we'll take these in two bits.
Chair?
Yes, Councillor Neal?
I just wanted to bring up, I'm concerned with one word in the proposal before you go. It's not me being pedantic, but I don't want members of the public to get the wrong end of the stick. On page 11, item 7, it says, going forward, it's proposed that the Planning Application Committee will continue to meet virtually using an appropriate platform. Technically, that is correct. Yes, we have had 2 meetings, but they have only been discussed, that was discussing changing the rules. The way that's worded looks as if we have been sitting, and that people might think that we have made, had debate and judgment on their applications. I think that word should be to start, not to continue.
Okay, Jackie, are we happy with that?
Chair, sorry, I don't understand. That's part of the report, which is explaining the proposal going forward for the temporary continuance of virtual meetings. I don't think, do we need to change the words of the report? You're not actually, isn't actually what you're agreeing, the words of the report. It's actually the recommendations are set out in the appendices.
No, I'm just concerned that if members of the public, do they get to see this report?
Yeah.
Then they might be thinking that we have sat and made judgments on an application that didn't, you know, they weren't happy with, when we haven't, because we haven't actually sat we haven't sat before to make any judgments. We've only
Mark, can we change the word there?
Discussed about changing the route.
All we can do on that is Jackie will just perhaps take a minute and note that in the minutes. That's all that can be done on that. I mean, in response to some of the comments that have been made, I'm more than happy to, if members, you know, to perhaps at the end of the August meeting review the public speaking situation, if that's something that would, you know, obviously we put 3 months in here, but actually with the guidance that was issued, this report's completed before we had new guidance issued 2 days ago, and it appears that you know, that guidance would suggest it's more likely we might be able to make some alternative arrangements. So I'm more than happy to review it at the end of the August meeting, if that's what we'd like to do. And I just very quickly, I just want to sort of make sure members have sort of seen and looked at the data in paragraphs 10 and 11 and 12, which just sort of gives an idea of what actually has happened over the last 3 years. I don't think any householder applications have been to committee have actually been overturned. just for context. But it gives you some useful information there on terms of, you know, how many objections we get on different types of applications that come to committee, which ones have been overturned, and you know, perhaps some idea of what has been contentious in the past.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I'm going to move the recommendations. Have I got a seconder for book recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. I'm going to move them separately. So we're going to vote on the first one, number 1, which is on page 9. All those in favour? Sandra, did you want to come in?
I was wondering if I could suggest an amendment to the recommendations. I guess it's 8A, B, and C. Is that right? That we're voting on at the moment.
And we're on recommendation 1.
Oh yeah, but that refers to. Sorry, that refers to Appendix C.
Yeah.
Well, I would still like to see us going back for minor applications to 2 objections, because if you look at the actual list of numbers of objections that we've had for minor applications, the vast majority was 2 objections, and then it starts going down for 3, 4, and 5. So I'd still like us to continue with what we have been doing previously and have minor applications coming to committee to 2 or more objections. And I'd also like to, I don't know if that can be included in the delegation scheme, but I'd like to make absolute sure that anyone who objects to another application is clearly being told about the opportunity to get in contact with their councillor and for them to call it in. So I don't know if that can be in the delegation, but I really want them to have our contact details sent to them rather than an automated letter that doesn't explain how they can get this called into committee.
Well, that's a lot of different pieces. Well, the recommendation has been moved and seconded. If this fails, then we'll have to have a motion to come back. So I'm going to move the recommendation. I've got that second, and we're going on number 1. All those in favour, please show.
That, Chair.
Yep.
You, members are able to discuss the motion before them, and obviously Councillor Bogerline has, you know, something they want to respond to the issues that Councillor Bogerline has just raised, including other members.
Anyone wish to discuss anything Councillor Bogerline has said? Councillor Sands?
Thank you, Chair. I do see the point that Councillor Bogerline is trying to make, and I did have my hand up before, because I don't believe that the wording in paragraph 7 at the top of page 11 is really very helpful. So I can't support part 1 of the recommendations.
Councillor Lovick, then Councillor Neal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just to be clear, we're looking at the scheme of delegations, which is set out on page 18 of your agenda, Appendix C, rather than the actual wording of the report, which I will minute your concerns, but we're not agreeing with the report. We're actually agreeing a change to the scheme of delegations. Clarity.
Councillor Lovick?
Yes, I'd like to support Councillor Bogerline in her suggestion that we go back to 8B, where it says, except where 4 or more objections are received, that could be changed to 2 or more objections. I'm still of the opinion that I don't like this delegated scheme, but that would be an improvement at least.
Councillor Neal?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Bogerline, but on a technical basis, if we don't want to move it from 2 to 4, then we should actually just not vote for this proposal, which will actually then leave it in back to status quo.
Councillor Peake? You're
Yeah.
there, Councillor.
Yeah, what I agree with is what Sandra Boatline said. I think with going four objections, it goes to delegated powers. I think, you know, we're going to lose a lot of sort of like ground on that for people who just two people, you know what I mean? So I back Sandra on that.
Thank you. David, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on Councillor Neil's point, which I think what Councillor Neil just said was if you don't vote for these changes, then it goes back to the status quo. If you don't, you need to vote for a change to the scheme of delegation, because at the moment the scheme of delegation is everything is delegated subject to referral through the chair or the vice chair. So you need to make a change at this point to the scheme of delegation in some way, shape or form. Voting for no change just puts it back to matters being dealt with through yourself, Chair, and the Vice Chair.
Sorry, thank you. Yes, yeah, I missed that. Yeah, cheers.
Councillor Huntley?
Thank you, Chair. So just a point of clarification, if we're looking on page 18, it would be 2A that we're changing to 2 from 4. People have been talking about another page, but that's what we'd be looking at. That sounds a sensible suggestion to me.
Yeah, that's correct. It's best to look at Appendix C because that's the detailed wording that you are all agreeing. That's correct. So 2A from 4 down to 2 is the recommendation by Sandra Boatline.
Okay, I need some help here, Mark or Jackie.
Just to say that while several members during discussion said they've supported Councillor Boatline, there's been no official seconder. Thank you.
Well, it's 2 or 3 now.
I officially second it, Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's brilliant. So that's seconded by Councillor Neil.
Councillor Stewley?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I understood that this new delegation scheme is set up with 4 instead of 2, with a view to reducing officer time. If we reduce the number of objections to 2, can I ask Mark or David, would it still be practical and possible to put together the meetings as proposed? Thank you.
Anyone?
It's always difficult to know how many cases we're going to have at a particular meeting. I think so. Yeah, it's sort of a bit of a how long is a piece of string question to a certain extent. You know, we'll clearly it will be. It will take less resource than what we had historically because this would mean that more schemes are delegated. However. And you know, it will hopefully focus members on those applications which have got the largest number of objections. Quite simply, whether they are small or large, minor or major. You know, we'll clearly have to, if it's whatever decision is made today, we'll clearly have to resource that as appropriate. Sorry, I don't know.
Well, it's been moved to the second. Judith? Councillor Lewin?
Yes, thank you for pointing out, I think it was David who pointed out that if we don't approve this today, we go back to the scheme that we've been working under for the last 3 months, which is even more delegation. So I want to make it clear that I'd like to go back to the former scheme of delegation before lockdown, which is in Appendix A. And in voting against the scheme that is before us today, I suppose I ought to try and put forward the motion of going back to that scheme of delegation, the former scheme, and that's at Appendix A. So I would formally like to put that forward as a motion.
Seconded.
We've got three motions now.
Right.
I can't hear you, Jackie. You move.
Procedural matter. You have got the main motion, and then you've had a motion to amend it slightly by moving 2 to 4, and then you've got an opposite motion. So you would need to move the amendments and then go back to the main motion, and then Councillor Lubbock's motion would then come into operation depending on whether that one, obviously if Appendix C was agreed, you would then by default, you wouldn't vote again.
Okay, thank you. Well,
and I take it that Councillor Lubbock's hasn't been seconded yet.
Yeah, I second it. I seconded.
Yeah, but yeah, that motion would still have to hold. So the order is your main motion with the amendment. If the amendment falls or that, then you vote on the main motion as or not amended as such, and then if that fails, then you could vote on A. Is that all right?
Yes, thank you. Well, we'll vote on the first one, which is proposed by Councillor Bergline to change it 2 to 4 or back to 2 to 4. Can I have all those in favour of changing it back to 4, please? Can you show of hands?
I thought the motion was to change it from 4 to 2. You put it the other way round, Keith. Can we just clarify that, please?
Yes, the proposal is in Appendix C to change, is it 2 to 2A from to change subject to 2 or more objections.
Yeah.
Okay. So please could you put your hands up? Sorry, Chair, could members please put their hands up and I'll call your names. So that's Councillor Huntley, Councillor Utton, Councillor Samaisi, Councillor Peake, Councillor Neal, Councillor Lubbock. Councillor Huntley, I've called your name. So the names I've called out are Councillors Huntley, Upton, Samaisi, Peake, Neal, Lubbock, and sorry, Councillor Bogerline, apologies, and Sands. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll call your names again because it is difficult looking on a screen. So it's Councillors Huntley, Utton, Samaisi, Peake, Neal, Lubbock, Bogerline, and Sands are voting to amend 2A from 4 people to 2.
Thank you. All those against?
Against, Councillor Stookley, Maxwell, Button, and Driver. Have I left anybody out?
No. Anyone abstained? No. Well, that's been carried in.
So now that becomes part of your substantive motion. So if you move one, if you go back to page 9 and you moved the recommendation 1, that would include what the amendment in the proposed scheme of delegations.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded by moved by me and seconded by Councillor Maxwell. I will take a vote on this with the amendment which we just voted for. All those in favour, please show.
Councillors Driver, Maxwell, Huntley, Bogerline, Samaisi, Sands, Peake, Neal. That's it. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Button and Huntley.
And
I'll just read those. Sorry, Chair, can I just read those again? Because obviously it's...
Councillor Stookley as well.
I've called, yeah, sorry, if I can just call them, thank you. It's Councillors Driver, Maxwell, Huntley, Bogerline, Samaisi, Sands, Peake, Neal, Button, Huntley and Stookley voting in favour.
All those against, please show.
That's Councillor Lubbock, Councillor Utton.
Thank you. And any extensions? No, thank you. So that's been passed.
So just to sum up, you've agreed the proposed Appendix C as your new scheme of delegations, subject to amending subject to the amendment that was made in the 2 to 2A.
We move on to number 2, which is the public speaking bit. This has been moved and seconded by Councillor Maxwell. All those in favour, please show.
Chair,
Yes.
just again, members may wish to discuss this.
Okay. Did anyone want any more discussion on this, Councillor Bergline?
I would again like to, I don't know how to best amend it, but I would like to include the option for ward councillors to speak at the actual virtual meeting on behalf of residents.
Jackie?
Sorry, I just wanted to say that that is we could practically accommodate that. And also, obviously, there is the accessibility, you know, if somebody couldn't write, we would obviously be able to access. I think we would be able to accommodate them to on Zoom or Microsoft Teams when we move across to those.
I don't think any councillor wants to get rid of the public. The more public, the better involvement. So it's just finding a way to do it on Zoom, I think. Anyone else? Councillor Sands, and then Councillor Stuvey, and then Councillor Button.
I am still of the opinion that we should make provision for those who don't have access to the sort of technology we're using now to be able to phone in and have their 3 minutes patched in and be heard that way, because there are an awful lot of people out there who don't really have access to all the technology. I mean, we know this from a practical viewpoint in schools, the number of children who still don't have access to computers. So I think a phone option and a waiting room should be seriously considered.
I think we should consider all options, but we have to move forward. Councillor Stewley?
Thank you. Just for clarity, does the suggestion that Councillor Bogle made need to be seconded and added into this document, please?
Jackie?
Well, I assume that you were just discussing the issues at the moment, but obviously if somebody wanted to move an amendment, yes, that would need to be seconded.
Councillor Button?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the second vote, are we adding the fact that we're going to look at it again after the August meeting?
Yes.
That is all part of that amendment.
I think we'll look at it, if the rules change, we'll look at it tomorrow, won't we, Mark?
I think well, what you're voting on is the public speaking arrangement specifically, and that's the case, and that would be the case whether it's a physical or virtual meeting. What we'll certainly keep under review is whether we can hold it in City Hall or whether we'll do it via Zoom or not. And so that's a practical safety and a technology matters that need to sort of come and aligned to allow a physical meeting in City Hall. But in terms of the public speaking arrangements you're agreeing that you would agree today, I'm more than happy that we commit to review those after the August meeting. So.
Okay, are we clear on that? Thank you. Are we prepared to go to the recommendation or not? Sandra?
Could I formally move my amendment for the next meeting? I mean, I understand that afterwards we review the options and hopefully we can have the public speaking again anyways, but for the August meeting, could I suggest that ward councillors are allowed to join the Zoom meeting and give a representation, please?
Can I second that, please?
Okay. Councillor Sands?
That's right, Ian beat me to it. I was going to second.
You want to second that? Okay, fine. With all those in favour of the recommendation, unless anyone wants to speak on this?
Chair, you now need to move the amendment.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, yeah, but we can speak on it first, can't we?
Yeah.
Anyone wish to speak on the amendment? No, all those in favour, please show.
Chair, that looks unanimous if your hand's up.
That's unanimous, yeah. Okay, we move to the substantial motion with the amendment put in. All those in favour, please show.
That's
unanimous.
Does that look unanimous? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes the business for today. Thank you. And we'll see you. Oh, Mark, don't go here, anyone, Mark?
I just want to say on a practical note, something that Councillor Bogerline mentioned was about how we inform neighbours or members of the public of the scheme of delegation. I'll have to check what our letters say at the moment about that. I think it probably refers to the website, but this scheme of delegation will now take immediate effect. So there may be a bit of a what we'll do is we'll have a look at the letters, see what they say, perhaps put some additional information in there to make clear what people need to do and what the scheme of delegation is. There's clearly going to be a little bit of a delay between now and getting those letters amended. And obviously the scheme of delegation is of immediate effect. So I flag that up. Just 2 points. Obviously, there will be a delay in amending any neighbour letters. And 2, that obviously any applications currently in the system, I mean, members may wish to want to have a quick scan through the weekly lists to see if there's anything in there that sort of concerns them or they would want to call in. So just flag that.
Jackie?
Just to let you know that any amendments, because obviously this is an amendment to Appendix 11 of the Constitution, which, because you've agreed it, I'll be able to amend it and put it on the website early next week. And also to remind members that the weekly lists are published on eCouncillor every Friday. That's one of my duties, that I liaise with the planning officers to do that. So just to make sure that you're checking eCouncillor. If anybody's got any difficulties with that, please let me know.
Okay, thank you very much for turning up. We'll see you in August, either on Zoom or in the council chamber or somewhere.
The next item was the date of the next meeting, which is the second Thursday of the month.
August. Yep, okay. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.